But I want to hand it over to Steve. Steve, thank you for being here tonight. And want to go ahead and give you the platform. So if you want to go ahead and try to share something, but we'll let you go ahead and fill us in on everything that we need to know about WWVH.
Alrighty, I hope you're seeing my first slide at this point.
Yep, coming
Good.
through.
Sometimes it gets cropped off on Zoom, so hopefully it'll be all right. If there's any trouble, let me know, but we'll figure it out.
I think it looks good.
Alrighty. Let me introduce myself first. Of course, I have to get on the slideshow.
Hey, I'll
I'm
mention
Steve.
real quick, if everybody could go ahead and mute themselves real quick, that'd be great. Thanks. Go ahead.
Now that reminds me of another story. I was doing, I think it was the Long Island CW Club. I was doing one of my other presentations during COVID, and one of their members fell asleep, which is, a reflection on me, I guess. But um, the problem was he was not muted and he was snoring. And whoever was the master of ceremonies couldn't figure out how to mute him, you know, force the mute. So I was talking and he was snoring. And then he woke up and asked questions. So I give him credit. All righty. Already, look at that. I got like 3 words in and an anecdote. Well, you've introduced me very well. Thank you very much. My background is as a broadcast engineer in my working life. I have done a few other things. I was in security electronics for a couple of years. I sort of wanted a break from broadcast radio, and that was very interesting. I spent a lot of time in jail, but the best part of doing security electronics work in jail is I could leave each evening, and a lot of the others couldn't, and I really got a dose of strange human behavior to observe it. Anyways, I've been a broadcast engineering manager since the early 80s, and I had worked part-time at a radio station while I was going to college, and then I was offered the chief position, and that really excited me, and I stopped going to college. And then later I went to work at a university deliberately to Idaho to go to operate Boise State Radio, the state public radio service. But I went to the university so I could finish my degree, and that was a good deal. I think it was $50 a semester is all you had to pay. So I'll take that. And subsequently, I was general manager there for a short time. The president of the university and I didn't necessarily agree, so I went to take another job in Wisconsin as director of engineering for Wisconsin Public Radio, which was a much larger operation, about 35 stations, I think, when I was done, rather. So I've been a ham for even longer than I've been a broadcast engineer. I consider myself a pretty active ham. I've never really, had any hiatus from the hobby, and I'm always getting into something new and different. But I also stick with old timey stuff, like 40-meter CW. I mean, that's where I was a novice, 1976, and here I am doing it still today. I get a kick out of it. Although the other night I was on 40, pretty late. It would have been 2 or 3 o'clock here, so getting to be early morning on the mainland. And I didn't hear a single CW signal. But the reverse beacon network showed me getting into New Jersey and Ohio, and so the band was open, and the FT8 signals were like, so that worries me a little bit for the future of CW. But anyhow, I am drifting off the subject. So my call sign's WD8DAS. I have 2 commercial licenses, radio telegraph license number 1. I don't think anybody can beat that. Now, the only reason I have number 1 is they reorganized the commercial radio telegraph tickets. You would have thought they probably would have stopped doing it, but at about the same time that I became interested in marine, Morse, and ship and shore stations and stuff like that, I went through a phase, and I said, I'm going to get my radio telegraph ticket. And it was very hard to find anyone to do to be the COLEM, the equivalent of volunteer examiner for commercial. And luckily, I didn't need the CW part of it. I don't think there would have been anybody to give me that. The extra class 20 word per minute extra was accepted. So that was good. And in the end, I had it test proctored by a librarian in my local town there in Madison. So worked out nicely. Just by accident, happened to get the first of the new line of radio telegraph tickets. And my radio telephone ticket's much older. That goes back to the 80s when I was getting into broadcasting. I was very irritated because I passed the second and the first, and they sent me a general radio telephone certificate. So you only needed the second to get a general. So I was a little irritated. I wanted my first, but they changed it. I'm proud of my certifications from the Society of Broadcast Engineers. I got the senior level, so I wouldn't have to keep renewing it. But otherwise, it's a pretty normal certification. And also FEMA emergency management. I got interested in that at one point. So those were the certificates I could think of. Now, you want to not hear about me. You want to hear about the radio station. So WWVH is located on the island of Kauai, which is sort of the upper northwestern main island of the Hawaiian chain. You can see in the image there that we're located on the southwest coast of that island. That's the leeward side of the island. So it's dry out here, almost desert conditions. The middle of the island is one of the very wettest places on Earth. But out here where the radio station is, it's sand and cactuses and stuff. Very strange. The windward side is the northeast and northeastern coast, and it's very damp up there too. It rains every day, but absolutely rains, torrential rains in the middle of the island in those that rough terrain there. It's mostly inaccessible. There is no road that goes. You can see a road in this map. It doesn't go all the way around the island. The terrain is so rough in some areas. We're located on a Navy base, the Pacific Missile Range facility, and that complicates everything in my life. So, and makes everything take 10 times as long as it should. But part of that's being in Hawaii, though. You can't get lithium batteries shipped here. How do you live without lithium batteries in this world? All right. The naval base, though, is mostly about sort of research and development of new weapons and testing of weapons. They have a huge array of underwater sensors off the beach here right behind me to detect what the results are of their tests. Pretty interesting. There's a airfield here, which in World War II was an Army Air Corps airfield, and a famous flyer, now I blank on his name, but he had a movie made about him. He was an Olympic runner. I can't think now, but he flew out of there and had like a 20 or 30 days adrift in the ocean. He went most of the way across the Pacific, floating on a raft. So very interesting stories. It's an interesting place to live and to explore. WWVH is a service of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And you guys have some gray hairs, I see, and you'll know that as the National Bureau of Standards, the earlier name. But it has been an organization for a surprisingly long period of time. 1901 is the first formation of the Bureau of Standards. And it's part of the Department of Commerce at this point. And it is one of the nation's, and I believe the world's oldest physical science laboratories. I think the one in France is older, and maybe, it depends how you define a national physical science laboratory. I list our mission and vision. I probably need to recite that, but it's pretty typical. But we are meant to support lots of other activities by producing standards. And the radio station is one way those two different standards are disseminated. First and foremost, frequency. And only second to that is time, because time is a derivative of frequency. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in addition to WWVH, of course, you guys know that WWV is in Fort Collins, and NIST also has laboratories, fairly surprisingly elaborate ones in Boulder. And I think it's a little bit more management oriented in Gaithersburg. I don't really know too much about that facility. Talk about the history of the station. WWVH began operations in 1948 on the island of Maui, in what was then the territory of Hawaii. And the original station ran fairly low power signals. I haven't really been able to pin down the power levels, but they were on 5, 10, and 15 megahertz only from that site. It was very close to a shoreline that was eroding, and that put a fine point on the idea that they probably would need to move. I do understand the building is still there, so maybe there was a seawall built or something. I don't know all those details. But the shoreline was encroaching. It was almost to the building, and it was splashing on the 10 megahertz antenna, which is not good. And so it was decided they needed a new location. And by 1971, that federal project had been completed, and we were on our location in Hawaii. This is redundant for you guys, but of course this is shortwave operation. That's all we do. We typically run 10,000 watts on 5, 10, and 15, and 5,000 watts on 2.5 megahertz. We do not have 20 or 25 megahertz here, nor do we have a low frequency like WWVB. I do get, I'd say that's my most frequent inquiry from the public is, why doesn't their atomic clock work after they move to Hawaii? And I researched that point a little bit, and WWVB does get here, but the AM encoded time code is lost in the noise 99% of the time. The new PSK-based time code is decodable here. I bought one of the lacrosse clocks, and it is indeed at my house. It locked up in the evening. It wasn't even dark yet. So that's amazing, the difference. However, at the radio station here, that same clock would not lock. Now, it could be just the difference in noise level from a house to an office, but also the receiver might have been desensitized by the other big HF signals. Now, here's what in broadcast radio terms we would call the format clock. The wheel terminology is more maritime ship or shore station terminology, where they had an automated thing to send V's and the call sign and all that jazz, if you remember that. So the wheel was a physical object that transmitted, it was running on a clockwork, and it transmitted calls for traffic and so on at different points in the hour. Our wheel is automated with a mix of signals. We have a time code, BCD encoded time code. It's a 100 hertz subcarrier. So it's just low frequency audio that is in turn encoded with the time information. That's present always. The tones and the intervals and the ticks and the voice announcements and the special announcements are all played from various systems at the appropriate time and mixed together to go to the transmitters. So we have, we're providing standards for frequencies, time intervals is important, audio tone standards, all that stuff is traceable. So
I noticed something there I hadn't picked up before. Why is the 440 tone omitted during the first hour?
I have no idea.
There's a little piece of history.
I think the most interesting thing about the wheel and the timing of signals for me is that the two voice announcements are offset. WWV's is closer to the top of the minute, and WWVH is just previous to that, both in a fairly silent period, other than ticks. The advantage there is that the stations are well disciplined in terms of frequency, I hope. You will often receive them both clearly. There might be some beat from different time of arrival and so on, but so you can actually discern the two. They don't interfere with each other as far as the announcement. So you know which station you are hearing based on the announcement. And that brings me to the voice of WWVH. Her name is Jane Barbie, and she was a famous voice artist. She recorded thousands and thousands of telephone company recordings. She worked for the company that also leased the devices, the machines that were used for time and temperature announcements and things, like that. And one of those was used at WWV and another at WWVH. But she was also a movie actress and had done work, announcing work for other purposes. But she really focused most of her career on serving these companies who wanted to have telephonic, you can call and get the temperature, you can call and get the time, you can call and get information about bank rates, stuff like that. And of course, the female voice is distinguishable easily from the male voice on WWV. So that was, I'm sure, the reason for that decision. Here's the mechanical device that used to play back her announcements. It's a machine. It's instead of tape, it has a drum with a sheet of magnetic recording media on it. And in fact, the head moves around to select tracks on the drum. It's kind of a blurry picture. It's a screenshot I took out of a guy's film that was digitized, and it is on YouTube from 1988. These machines were called the Autochron, and the Autochron sat in the rack room, was one of the shielded rooms here. And I can pinpoint the place it sat by the marks on the linoleum floor. So it's not that far into the past. There were two main groups of announcements on that rotating drum. The left part had the hour announcements and the right drum contained the minutes so that they could, be played quickly one after the other. They could be sourced independently. Other announcements in those days were played back from NAB standard tape cartridge machines as used in radio for many decades, radio and television. It's an audio tape, roughly the size of an 8-track cartridge, and it shares some characteristics. It is an endless loop of tape, uses Q tones to mark the beginning and then the point at which it's re-cued, it stops automatically. So they're very convenient. But that would have meant that the announcements like the geophysical reports, I don't really know all the different ones that were done, but they would have been recorded manually and the tape cartridge carried to these players and put in to be updated. We don't have to do that anymore, at least. Our technology level is a mix of 1990s vintage and later, but not too much later. But no tape cartridge machines, although I would know how to fix those very, very well. Here is that rack room. This is our left-hand screened room. It's a shielded room, and that's to keep our own RF from bothering what is often kind of sensitive gear. And it can really be confusing for troubleshooting. I would be more cognizant of it than most technicians, I'm sure. In this room, we have the atomic clocks, the time code generators, all the redundancy switching for those, which is really complicated. And we also have the low-level signal generators that originate each frequency's transmission. So there's a 2.5, a 5, a 10, a 15, and also backups for those originating in this room at low level and running on coax back to the transmitters. Look a little closer at the atomic clocks. In this photograph, the atomic clock is down at the bottom. It's a kind of a sleek looking Hewlett-Packard device. And the time code generator is the thing at the top with the large time display. The time code generator currently is the way Jane Barbie's voice is played back. So, and the ticks. And so it was, that's the 1990s technology of digital audio storage and play out. That was very advanced for its day. And it's generating the 100 hertz subcarrier with the BCD encoded data.
How many atomic clocks do you have, or is it just one?
We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. We just rearranged them, so I was thinking in my mind where they are and what we're doing with them. And we also have a rubidium time standard that's GPS disciplined as an emergency backup. Our time is better than GPS. I have to take pride in that. So, but if all else failed, that would be very handy to have. Our time scale was formed with 3 of the 4 atomic clocks, but currently a pair is in play, the rubidium and the clock in this photograph, the atomic clock, which is now designated as B on the front. You don't need to know all that, but I'm still trying to figure it out. We rearranged things because the one we had as our master, which was labeled B, its cesium tube was running out of cesium. So we had to put it aside and use one of the others as the primary. So there are 4 total. One is, shall we say, not to be relied upon because it's going to run out of cesium. And so far, I haven't been able to get funding to replace that tube. But we do have 3 others, so it's no crisis.
Question, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody that does any type of metrology always wants to trace back their standards to NIST. Do you have to trace back the standards of these clocks to some higher level NIST, or are you the ultimate authority?
Well, yeah, I'll explain that. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. The time scale, which is the terminology we use there's a time scale in Boulder, there's a time scale at Fort Collins, and there's a time scale here. So these clocks, they do not drift much, but they do drift. The way they work is cesium atoms are excited by an RF arc in this tube. And then a beam of them is sent to a chamber where they're detected. So the arc excites their outer electron to the next energy level. And then when they go over to the detector area, that energy comes out because the electron wants to fall back to its favorite energy level. And it emits 1 photon at exactly a precise frequency. And that is the ultimate standard out of an atomic clock of these types anyways. Either a maser or any of the others, I guess. Optical clocks are different, but so in this case, it's cesium, and cesium has a certain frequency but it is just 1 photon coming out of each one, and that has to be detected. And that is a very predictable, very, many, many decimal places reliable. I think the uncertainty is quantum at that point about exactly what frequency it's on. So it's way, way down. So the clock does drift though, because it's a phase lock loop that's being disciplined by that frequency coming from the cesium. the decay, I guess you could say, of that cesium atom. So, but you wanted to know about how we trace. So originally these stood alone until fairly recently, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. No, it's older than that. But I don't think they relied on it till more recently. But anyways, it's a system called TMAS. It's a PC-based system that uses the idea of GPS common view to take out all the variations that occur in GPS. And if you can see two satellites at widely disparate angles, and we can see one, if Colorado can see the same two that we see, we have a path to get time from Colorado. So that's used to automatically steer these clocks. They don't need much steering. And in fact, I almost would prefer to go back to the old method where the operators here, my partner and I, there's two of us technical people, that we actually would steer the clocks and it wouldn't be automatic because the TMAS actually jerks it around a little bit. It's, again, GPS is not ideal for this purpose, but when you have that common view where two locations can see, and then they talk over the internet about the ephemeris, the data of the orbits and all this jazz, you can subtract out like the ionospheric variations, the tropospheric variations, the Doppler, all these things. And we're about to implement a new version of that system. And it's a very interesting to me. I'm trying to learn more and more about it.
I have a
Again,
question here.
Say that again.
I don't know if you can hear me. I'm Keith, AK0Q.
Hey there.
I have a burning question, and that is when you have a tick that occurs like right now, right?
Yeah.
And then you excite that cesium a little bit differently. Does it actually come up with a tick that occurs a little bit different? Or are they all the same worldwide?
Well, it starts with the frequency, and the ticks are actually when you count the frequency. So these clocks, just by design, their phase lock loop that is governed by the cesium emission, generate a 5 megahertz signal very, very, very accurately. And the clocks then, and other devices, we have like 6 different things that count 5 million cycles, and then you get a pulse, a tick, and that interval is the second.
But couldn't that be off like a gazillionth of a second between two locations?
Between, say, Colorado and here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because we're checking with this path that is weirdly through the internet and through GPS common view, we should be within about 20 nanoseconds of each other.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I do admit that occasionally we will catch it like, what the heck? We just jumped 50 nanoseconds. What's that about? And we see it because the clock that's getting steered now is different than the others that were just doing their very slow drift. But it's down to these nanosecond levels that we're observing this. But the jerking around is the old TMAS system, maybe making mistakes about its steering of the clock. And I had a thought that I might do some experiments where I actually have a timed relay that actually just disconnects the steering for most of the day and lets it only do it occasionally, and see how that is. That might be better. Because the stability of the atomic clock is way better than the thing that's steering it. So the rubidium clock gives you another way to check. Of course, it is driven from GPS, but at least you have some other reasonably good thing to try to. Well, a lot of our day is spent trying to do reality checks and understanding which do we trust. Here's a little closer view with the patch down on the atomic clock. not that interesting. There's a number of settings and parameters inside, and you can see how the cesium tube is aging. There's a voltage that's applied, several hundred volts, as I recall, and it has sort of an AGC action to try and keep the output consistent as it ages. I should mention that you had asked about the sort of the larger thing now. Our standard here previously ran free, but it was disciplined through modem connection, and there's a way to measure how much time it was taking. So that's old school stuff. We actually still provide a time service by modem. I don't know if anyone calls it. I fixed the modems the other day. There were 3 of them that had failed. So, and I bought a couple spares. US Robotics still sells the traditional modem like we used to use for dial-up internet. But anyways, I'm drifting off the subject again. We are in fact linked to the timescales in Boulder and Fort Collins. They are in partnership with the U.S. Naval Observatory's timescale. There is an endless debate, decades-long, maybe century-long argument about who's in charge of time in the United States. Is it the USNO, the Naval Observatory, or is it NIST or NBS earlier? But they are partners. And in turn, they are members of the world group of serious time players. I'm drawing a blank on the name of that organization, but you have to have a certain level of sophistication in your time scale. You can't just have one of those rubidium clocks with GPS discipline. No. You have to be better, way better than that. And there is a bit of an art to it, because when you are running a constellation, you might say, of atomic clocks, and in Colorado, there are larger groups, they're not a small group like ours. There's a little bit of an art to predicting what they're going to do, because each clock has its own personality. You watch how it drifts, what speed, what rate of change, and all that. And so we have several people who that's a big part of their job. One for the Boulder group, Colorado group, and the other for the Fort Collins. You probably.
How is it you say your time is better than Naval Observatory?
Well, I say it's better than GPS, as they're getting it from us ultimately, and it gets distorted from there. But USNO has their own time scale, and they have their own techniques, but I think it's roughly equivalent to NIST.
Yeah. Well, GPS comes off of USNO.
Yeah. So, but they're all taking each other into account in their steering decisions, both nationally and worldwide. So there's an interconnected element to it. And I may misstate things. I'm just only been around a year or so. So
how do you compare them to the other sites?
They have satellite links that they can subtract out all the differences between the two, because it's a bi-directional link.
Yeah, common view technique.
Yes, same idea, but I think it's on KU band, and it's a permanent, they're geosynchronous satellites. But occasionally I'll be listening to, in our meetings, they'll be talking about how that link has become unstable and that cannot be trusted. And so that each is on its own for a while till they figure out what's going wrong. So our transmitters obviously are modulated with audio. We have transmitters that produce standard AM, double sideband full carrier. That sometimes seems kind of old-fashioned to people, but it's a very traditional shortwave transmission mode. The different modulation levels are used. 50% when we have a steady tone on the air, 50% modulation for the 100 hertz time code subcarrier, 100% for the ticks, the second pulses, as well as for the minute and hour tones, and 75% or thereabouts for the voice announcements, because the voice announcements that are refreshed every day or more frequently than that may vary by just simply how close the announcer was to the microphone, and we have processing to try and keep the level steady, but the processing here is not sophisticated like I would have had on a real entertainment radio station. So there is some variation on that one. Now this is a photograph of the oscilloscope that we keep operating in the control room all the time. We can look at any of the transmitters RF samples and the audio feeding it. So we have a dual trace display here, and we're looking at, I just took the picture right at the moment that the top of the minute tone was airing. And it's not quite 100, but I wouldn't want to be right on 100 because then you're going to have a chance of splattering as the AC power voltage goes up and down. But the upper waveform is the RF envelope, a sample of RF from the transmitter output. And the lower waveform is the applied audio. The more astute observers will notice that these two displays are out of phase, but I don't really care about that and for this purpose, but you know, the negative going sine wave should be pinching off the carrier, and conversely the positive modulation would be from the positive going. So somewhere in the audio to the console there, it's flipped. It's out of phase. It's balanced audio, so that's easy to have. I could just flip it again and then it would be right, but it doesn't matter for this purpose. Here's a look at the steady tone. You can see it's at a lower level, about 50%. And but you can start to see here, if you look close, you're starting to see the 100 hertz being also present in the waveforms. Much longer time for that one. You can just see kind of a wave in the wave, in the audio waveform. This makes it really clear. And I caught it at a moment when we had the steady tone and the 100 hertz, and you can see how they're mixing together. That's no problem. That's the intended situation. It would be the same if on an entertainment radio station, the announcer was talking over the music. Same thing. So I hired a model for this one to give you a picture in the transmitter room. The rigs you can see there are lined up. I see the 2.5 main. I see the 10, the 15 mains. I see a standby 15, and I see the standby 5 in that line. And so then there's 2 other rigs offset from that. Each frequency has a main and a backup, and they each have their own antenna. That was not the original installation, and over time, past engineers beefed things up so that now they can each have their own antenna. That's very nice because all you have to do to switch from main to auxiliary or back again is simply turn the transmitter on or off. And that's a great help. And you don't have to have any coaxial switching or anything. You're not trying to use one antenna for 2 rigs. You also, you're covering, with redundancy, you're covering both antenna trouble and transmitter trouble. And I guess also the driving equipment too, they're separate. So that's good redundancy. These units here with the beige colored front doors are made by a company called Elcom Bauer. I was not familiar with Elcom. I think they were an FM transmitter maker of the past. Bauer was a well-known maker of both AM and FM transmitters for broadcast service. Bauer's the only company I know that ever made a kit transmitter for radio stations. They sold a kit that the engineering department of a radio station could assemble to save money for the station. It was a 1 kilowatt, really a very normal design, but I think it used a pentode rather than a tetrode, and that became hard to find. So a lot of them are converted to tetrodes in the PA or the modulators. I may not be remembering that story quite right. So it's a legit company, and these are good units. They have a solid state driver. Oh my gosh, we're moving up into the 1990s here, but the rest of the unit is tubes. So it's a standard Motorola design with the MRF 422s. I built a spare. There was no spare here. So one of the first things I did when I got here was build a spare. You can still buy PC boards. They've been advertised in the back of QST forever. And I bought one of those boards and populated it. And so we got a spare now. But you can, of course, repair the ones that are in them. They are the most fragile part of the transmitter, though. So fairly frequent failures of those transistors. Well, once a year, that's too much by my reckoning, but other people.
You have a lot less real estate than WWV has.
Oh yeah, it's a small building here, really.
Yeah.
The modulators in these rigs are 4CX 5000s, and the PAs are 4CX 15,000. These are high-level plate modulation. So the PA is running Class C, and it has a separate modulation, transformer, and a modulator, push-pull modulator. That's not true of the other rigs. We'll talk about it. Here's the look of one with one of the doors open. Note the high-tech markings for the tuning, the current tuning, painter's tape. But that's better than what was happening before, which was writing on the transmitter. I hate that. So we're moving up. Here's one of the two remaining original transmitters from the original installation in 1971. Originally, there were 6 of these transmitters. There were 4 mains and 2 frequency agile backups. And there were 2 frequency agile antennas. Trouble is, they were not frequency agile, as in you could just push a button and it would automatically tune. It had to be manually done. So that means you're off for extended periods. But the site was manned in those days, so that probably limited the downtime. Maybe if you had to go out and change the antenna tuning and you had to change the transmitter, that's probably a half hour at least of downtime, depending on how well things go, maybe. These are made by American Electronic Labs. I've never seen that brand anywhere else, but they were a serious company. I just haven't had them. This is was a 40 kilowatt linear amplifier. Has a tubed driver, a 4CX 1500, and a tubed PA 4CX 10,000. The reason it's 40 kilowatts is for a fully modulated AM with a 10 kilowatt carrier, that's 40 kilowatts PEP. So this is the 2.5 main. There's another one off to the side that is the 2.5 auxiliary. Here's a view from the original manual for the station. These transmitters were built specifically for WWVH. So there were 6 of these rigs, and then there was the console from AEL as well. That console is still here and still in use, and 2 of the AELs. But the AEL transmitters have been extensively modified. They have different PAs in them, different drivers, and the 2 rigs are a little different from each other. So 2 different engineers were doing the modifications. They were originally water cooled with a heat exchanger on the top. That's a very interesting idea to me. I mean, I would move air through air-cooled tubes and take it out the top. But anyways, that is not the case any longer. They're air-cooled tubes. But they're nice, rugged, very solidly built transmitters. And the quality of construction matters here because we are in a highly corrosive environment. We use, I don't know if I can make an estimate, maybe 40% fresh air cooling. So we're bringing in ocean breeze all day through these transmitters, but we also cool the room with air conditioning. Not the most energy efficient way to do things, because most of the time it's hot outside here and very humid. It can be so humid and salty that salt stalagmites, stalactites form on the air intakes. So the transmitters look pretty corroded inside. So how well built they are matters. And they're all solidly built, and that means you can do a lot of preventive maintenance on them without breaking them. My colleague Chris, the technician, Chris Fujita, he takes the lead on those preventive maintenance jobs, and he is rebuilding tube sockets on a roughly 6-month interval to keep things reliable. I've never seen that anywhere else. I would go 6 years before I had to rebuild a socket in other sites. So being in Hawaii, literally on the beach, is not an ideal place for this. It's a good place for the RF takeoff angle, I'll say that. But here's that console covered up with odds and ends from our daily stuff. You can see that oscilloscope on the left, although it's blanked out right now. There's a spectrum analyzer on the top that we look at constantly. There's a logging system that keeps track of transmitter status. It runs on a, not a Raspberry Pi. What was the thing before those? The basic stamp. So it's had some trouble, and I built a new system that's based on a programmable logic controller, and it's actually sitting in my office here running as a test here. So we'll be changing that pretty soon. But yeah, there's samples from the transmitters here, rectified for audio, so you can know if a station's gone silent. And we can monitor. It's a good setup. Looking a little worn around the edges, but it's been here since 1971. So, and it used to have someone sitting in front of it most of the day. So. A different view on the other end of the transmitter room, and in this view you can see these black painted Rockwell Collins transmitters. These were hand-me-downs from a Navy installation. They're frequency agile 10 kilowatt PEP transmitters. So they're very cool. I mean, they're 1990s technology, and there's an exciter built in that it could do its own signal origination. We don't do it that way, but you could, because we want to use our frequency disciplined signal generators. There are some issues because they are auto-tuned. You'll notice there's no knobs on the front for tuning. It's all motor-driven, servo-controlled, 1990s logic cards. And that gets confused a significant amount of the time. And it's a known thing with these transmitters. But we don't really need auto-tune. It sits on 5 megahertz all day, every day. So I almost would prefer to have knobs and manual adjustments. At least it wouldn't go wrong. You shut it down to do maintenance, you bring it up, you spend an hour fighting with the auto-tune. It also is partly because the antennas that are attached to these rigs are receiving as well as transmitting. So they're receiving energy from the other transmitters on the same site. And I think that fools the auto-tune sensors. I believe that's because, like, you can turn one off and, for a moment and try to let it catch a good tune and then turn the other one back on. These use some small tubes in the driver stage. First, a single 4CX 350, and then a pair, and then that drives the 4CX 15,000. It's a big linear amplifier. It's multi-mode. It can run AM, SSB. It can be a CW transmitter. It could be a teletype transmitter, whatever you want. It can do direct FSK if you were using its own internal exciter. Here's a close-up of that exciter, and I think the coolest thing is that it has a microphone and a telegraph key jack. That's very tempting. I haven't done anything yet. The headphone jack would be driven by a remote receiver. Normally in an installation, that would actually be a different site where the receivers are. And then the audio would be brought back probably by telephone lines or microwave link or something like that. So you could have an operator right in front of this transmitter. I'm sure that's not how it was normally used, but it's ready for it. But look at all the modes. It can do independent sideband. It can do FSK, direct FSK, sideband, AM, and CW. But it means we can, with these rigs, we can only run 2.5 kilowatts carrier. Just a close up of those jacks. That's kind of fun. It isn't to scale, but here's some images of the transmitting tubes we use. And they are in order of size, but they're not to scale. The 4CX350 tubes have an interesting story. You notice it's an AC version. That's the long life version. But that full power, continuous duty use, they last about 5 months. We work those transmitters hard. We wouldn't normally be running the lower power, but the full power 5 megahertz transmitter was damaged a couple years ago. I believe the story is, it was before my time, but I believe I've worked it out that it was smoking. I'm going to guess it had a shorted turn in one of the transformers or something like that. It probably was still on the air because we being the engineers that were here at that time, didn't know there was a problem until the fire alarm went off from the smoke. And the fire department was first to arrive because they're right here on the base. And they immediately, without turning the power off, without pulling the disconnect, which is right behind the transmitter, they opened the doors and sprayed dry chemical extinguisher into it. And when that didn't stop the smoke, they emptied another one into it. And dry chemical ruins electronics. So that was the end of that transmitter. It's sitting out in our loading dock area. It's not even good for spare parts. It was another Elcom Bauer, so we should mention that. So I use it as sort of a lesson. Now we have a fire suppression system. I'm sure that was because of that incident, which dumps a fire retardant gas into the spaces that are of interest. That still wouldn't stop a transmitter that was smoking because it had a shorted turn in a transformer or something like that. And it might eventually burst into flames, though, and so that it's a help. I make it clear to every fire inspector that comes through to use the extinguishers we provide. Don't bring the one in from your truck. Now there's also signs all over the place saying don't do that, but would they look at those signs when they're responding? I don't know. This is the biggest dummy load I've had in a long time. I think it's the biggest one ever, but I might have had one that was a 30 kilowatt at another site, but it was an FM for FM. So this is, you know what a dummy load is, but it's just an array of resistors with air cooling passing from bottom to top. They're big, some people call them glow bar style resistors, about the size of your forearm. It does have a watt meter, not really calibrated, but it's very useful. Gives you a rough idea. And I'd hate to be without a dummy load. We only have the one, but it can be wheeled around to be used. There's no switching for it. We have to disconnect the coax from the output of the transmitter and attach it. So that's not that great, but we're already on the auxiliary probably if we need to do that. Here's an aerial view of our aerials, the antenna field and our building and our solar array. The black rectangular object is the solar array, then it provides a fair bit of our power. Well, I don't have current numbers on that, but because the array has deteriorated from its original specs, we're on the verge of getting the panels replaced. That project is already a go, even in spite of the current strange federal financial situation. The white topped long rectangular building is our building. The other square white building is, we call it the shop. It's sort of a shed with rough workbenches, hammering and sawing and banging type work, and lawn equipment and things like that, shovels and rakes and that kind of stuff. And a lot of junk. One of the things I learned here is that we are never allowed to throw anything away, but we really need to. So I will write to the inventory people in Colorado and say, I want to dispose of asset number, blah, 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 and I just never hear anything back. So that explains why I was so surprised to come here and see 6 lawnmowers sitting here, rusting. Okay, now I understand why. Okay, so you can see there's 8 antennas. So that gives us 1 for each main and 1 for each auxiliary. They're omnidirectional except for the 5 megahertz main and the 15 megahertz standby. The 15 megahertz standby is an experimental project that was homemade and made out of bits and pieces of other things. It works good, holding up pretty well, really. But you can see we are literally on the beach. There's the sand and there's the water. We'll look a little closer at the antennas. I think they're very interesting. They're made by a company called Valcom. And their main application was for on the deck of large ships for HF communications. They're made of an epoxy fiberglass composite that has copper, I think they're copper beryllium strips inside, so they can flex a lot. Some are guide, the very tallest are guide. The others are freestanding. We'll look a little closer. Here's the base of one of the fixed frequency antennas. So there's a tuning unit to do the final matching from a rigid piece of 50 ohm line coming in there, rigid coax over, and then we get a ground system and the vertical radiator. My number one question when we have a picture like this is people will say, why isn't it sitting on an insulator? I thought this is a vertical antenna. Well, it is all insulator. So what's bolted to that metal plate there is fiberglass epoxy composite. You can see the feeder comes from the glass bowl feed-through insulator on the side of the tuning unit up to a stud that's sticking out of the side of the antenna, and that connects to the interior strips of copper, the radiating element.
Why do we see no salt or corrosion?
I see a lot of corrosion,
Okay.
but the box is made of aluminum. The transmission line is made of hard-drawn copper. The fence is made of plastic.
What are the radials made of?
Copper, hard-drawn copper with a ring. That's where I see most of the corrosion, the green corrosion. But we actually maintain them. If there is any paint that comes off those plates and stuff, we will touch it right up. That plate is a hinged plate, meaning the antennas are meant to be laid down for maintenance. But I feel that at this point, because that hinge is very rusty, very painted, that there's a significant chance that if we try to lay it down to repaint, we will break it. So my plan I have a repainting project, but I'm sure in our current financial situation with the Doge shutdowns, we won't do it, but I'm going to use a large man lift to just paint the antennas in place. It's probably safer all the way around. And we will be able to do it if I can get one more technician. I feel it's a 3-person job. But yeah, it's meant to hinge over. It's pretty interesting. There you can actually see the hinge in that photo. This is one of the tunable antennas. So it's sort of a random height, and then it has variables inside inductance and capacitance. There's 2 of these. They're the ones that are inside the white picket fence. And they were originally attached to the frequency agile transmitters, the standby transmitters that were the two of those were in the original installation. Now we leave one on 10 megahertz and one on 5. So they're not being changed. So the 5 megahertz main is 2 half-wave tall verticals. So it's twice as tall as a typical, well, that's not true. The 10 and the 15 are also, but they just don't look that tall. But anyway, so the extra height over a quarter wave, actually 5/8 wave is the optimum for focusing the main lobe on the horizon. And then these are phased together to create a bidirectional pattern that does tend to favor the western side, but there's a big lobe to the east as well.
Steve, is that like an anti-corona ball on the top of those verticals?
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha.
Valcom calls it the valosphere or something like that. And they gradually fall apart and fall off, so they have to periodically be replaced. They're like rings of stainless. I think they're stainless, or it's really, really good aluminum, maybe aircraft aluminum. And but they're just bolted on. So with enough vibration, they will start to come loose and they fall off, which shortens the antenna slightly, but that's okay.
Is that disc cone shaped thing at the bottom, is that to keep critters from crawling up the pole, or what's that there for?
No, it's a skirt, literally a skirt for rain. There was a problem forming where the water would roll down the mast and go over the antenna connection point where the feeder wire goes over and attaches to the stud and cause the transmitters to trip out on a VISWAR fault. So with these umbrellas, I guess you could say, you get some protection from that. Now, if you had a driving rain coming in from the side, that it might still be a problem, but that has not proven to be the issue. The issue was the streaming, river coming down that was constantly and very salty water coming down. And it was causing, if it didn't cause the transmitter to trip off, it was corroding that connection real bad because you had that RF excitation there and the saltwater bath. There's a brick sitting there with a piece of plexiglass to keep water from pouring directly onto the bowl insulator. I don't know if that was really necessary or not, but I don't want to move it. Why not? So the antenna field is guarded by armed guards. It varies with the season to some degree, but the Nene geese, they're Canadian geese who got lost and went to Hawaii. And they have branched off into their own species. They have the standard attitude problem of a Canada goose. And they will either be very curious about what we're doing, or they'll be upset about our presence. And that's probably because they have a nest somewhere nearby, and so they're being protective. And they spend their time in the antenna field, and we're sort of interlopers from their point of view. But I have not been able to get through to them that we belong here. We're not supposed to feed any of the creatures, so I can't really bribe them or anything. That would be my next step. But you'll be leaning down, working on something. Imagine I got the cover off of the tuning unit on one of the antennas and I'm leaning over. The goose will come up and bite you in your butt, which not that big a deal, but it might make you jump and then you hurt yourself by jabbing yourself into a screwdriver or something that you're using.
By the way, as a birder, I noticed you said it incorrectly once and correctly another time. It's a Canada goose.
Yes.
Not Canadian. It's named after Mr. Canada.
Yeah, I tried to correct myself there.
Yeah. But I've heard them called cobra chickens.
They make a pretty bad mess too.
Oh, yeah.
And so our front porch, they come up on the front porch. I will acknowledge that they may think we're going to feed them or something because they come up on the porch and bang on the window. Maybe someone in the past fed them. I don't know. But anyways, then they hang out there and poop all over the porch and the parking lot and everything. Yeah, it's great. But they'll also do the wing slap thing if you get too close to them, but that doesn't hurt. So mind that. They
The
are
environmental conditions in Hawaii are much more difficult than here in Colorado.
yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I was about to say that you guys might have more routine high wind situations, but actually we get quite a lot of typhoonish, hurricane-ish storms. In the 90s, there was a really bad one that wiped out a lot of stuff on Kauai, and damaged a lot of stuff here. So I don't want to. Murphy's always listening, and what can go wrong will go wrong. So.
That's when all the chickens were released on Kauai, right?
Well, that was actually, it happened in the 19th century, I believe.
Oh, okay. I thought it
But
was
it's
a hurricane.
same principle. There were there were colonists, European colonists and Polynesians here, and they each had their own species of chicken. And the chickens of today are descended from the chickens that got loose in a typhoon hurricane. I don't really know the date of that, but it's 19th century. And there are chickens literally everywhere. Outside right now. I could probably
Hawaii is
tell.
very famous for its chickens.
Yes. It's the symbol. I have a hat that says Kauai and a rooster. There are chickens that live in the Burger King parking lot that I see when I go to Burger King on the weekend. There are chickens that hang around the McDonald's that's not about halfway from here to my house because they get handouts, from those places, from customers. I should put pictures of the chickens. I mean, there's a flock that lives here. I think they roost under the solar panels. So we're right on the beach. Here's a view from the sort of the brush line on the edge. So we're right there. There's the surf. There's a swimming beach just further along. This beach is off limits, except if you're on the base, you could naturally walk down it. You've already been authorized, if you got onto the base. The public is allowed to come in, but you have to get a permit. You have to have a background check, and you can get a permit because there's a restaurant people can go to. There's the swimming beach. There's not much else, I guess. The other stuff is all closed. But there's an exchange, for example. I guess veterans could go to the exchange, but it's not a very big exchange. Sort of like a 7-Eleven exchange. The most interesting thing in this picture for me is the island you can see on the horizon. It's called Niihau, and it is a private island owned by a family. It was purchased from the King of Hawaii in the 17th century, if I'm remembering right, and has been owned by one family. I think it was sold from one family to another, but it is a private island, and you are not allowed to go there. You could have permission, I'm sure. But there are native Hawaiians who live there, and they still speak native Hawaiian. But their kids, like everywhere, their kids want to go to the big city, and so their population keeps dwindling with each generation. They were the workers on the plantation that was there. It was a very familial setting, though. It was not a plantation like you would think of as slavery plantation. And the owners of that treat it as a nature preserve at this point. And the two brothers also own a lot of the land on this end of Kauai, and they operate that as a preserve as well. So that's pretty cool. But the most interesting story about Niihau was on December 7th, 1941. They didn't know that there had been an attack on Oahu at Pearl Harbor. And I had never heard this until I moved here. A Japanese submarine was to was stationed during the attack and after the attack for several hours off the coast of Niihau, because the Japanese thought Niihau was unoccupied, unpopulated. That was not correct. But there was a sub there waiting to pick up any flyers who couldn't get back to their carriers, Japanese flyers. So their plan, and I can't believe I'm so into this topic of World War II stuff that I never knew any of that. And in fact, two fighters pilots did go over there, but they couldn't find the sub. They didn't see it. And one guy just climbed they both were low on fuel, had damage, and they were losing fuel. That was the rationale anyways. There's some more interesting stuff about that, but one of the flyers just deliberately crashed into the ocean when it was about time. So he committed suicide. The other landed on Niihau. And when he landed, I guess I should ask, are you interested in this story?
You bet. Keep going.
It's completely unrelated to WWVH. So this Japanese pilot landed his Zero, crash landed. He crashed because the whole island was crisscrossed with trenches. In the 30s, the Air Force General Billy Mitchell had one of his staff go to Niihau and ask the head of the family, the manager of the plantation, to plow furrows across the island because he predicted that would be the place Japan lands and tries to, and maybe have glider landings. So the family that owned the island bought a tractor from Sears Roebuck and plowed furrows across the whole island, every open space. And so one plane did try to land in this situation. He was low on fuel. I think I should mention, I believe the pilot actually, once he got lost from the bombers, he didn't know how to get back to the carriers because the bombers had the navigators. So the fighter pilots, while they had maps and stuff, they were not trained to know necessarily what to do. They were supposed to stay near enough to the bombers to follow them home. Anyways, crash lands, the pilot hits his head on the instrument panel and is knocked unconscious for a moment. Native Hawaiian, this is right in front of his house, comes out and he disarms the pilot, takes his pistol, Nambu pistol, and takes his packet of maps and papers and secretes them elsewhere. The pilot wakes up. He wants to know where is his gun and where is his papers. He's more worried about the papers because he feels he has lost the secret plans to the attack. So what begins is a crusade on the part of that Japanese pilot to take over the island. Literally, he got his pistol back. He did not find the papers. They were buried. The islanders still did not know why there was a Japanese pilot there. They didn't know an attack had occurred. They got nothing. There's one radio on the island, and it's in the manager's house, and the manager is not there. So they don't go in the house. So they're not listening to the radio. What happens is there's a storekeeper and his wife who are of Japanese descent. So they are Japanese, literally. In those days, Japanese American wasn't really a thing, unfortunately. So they were Japanese in outlook, and they just were there to run the store. And the husband of the couple decided to team up with the Japanese pilot explained to him that Japan had gone to war with the United States, and they formed a team to get those papers back. And so they commenced a reign of terror against the natives with a shotgun that they got out of the manager's house and the pistol. And so some islanders then set out on a boat and rowed all the way across that channel to Kauai to try and get help. There were signal fires set. So all this drama is happening. In the end, I think 2 days passed of this nonsense, and threatening the islanders, burning their houses, stuff like that, because the islanders were not armed. And the one of the Hawaiians, who was more built like a Samoan, a very big man, very strong man, he'd had enough. And he went up to these 2 Japanese fellows and said, you know, you need to give me those weapons. We're done. This is over. And the Japanese pilot shot him in the groin and the gut with his pistol. But that didn't really faze this guy. He picked the Japanese man up and dashed his head on the nearest big rock and killed him. And the shopkeeper used the shotgun to kill himself at that point, leaving his wife holding the treason bag. And she lived to a ripe old age, and because she was treated harshly, she never went to a concentration camp. She was in jail on Kauai and Oahu for a long period, but not past the end of the war. But this was the only case of actual Japanese, what would you call it? Sabotage, insurrection, I don't know. So she was left holding that bag, and she was treated very badly. The other Japanese workers on the island, like Kauai has many Japanese workers on the plantations. She was ostracized, and so she bonded in her mind with she made the right choice. So she was unrepentant to the end. There's a Japanese documentary where she speaks in Japanese. It's never been translated into English, like with subtitles or anything, where she explains how heroic her husband was and all that. So, but that's in the context of the days when they couldn't become citizens and stuff. It was weird, a different time. So apologies if that was not of interest, but
That's a great story, Steve.
it is. I was
Really
just so astonished to learn this. And if you go to Pearl Harbor, if you go to the museum, the actual Zero parts are there now. They stayed on Kauai the whole time till like 10 years ago. They were corroding and eroding. The tractor is over in the museum that plowed the furrows. It's so cool. Really literal history in front of us.
Steve, question: in that particular slide, there's a fairly dense undergrowth there. When you go out into the antenna field, do you have to worry, other than the geese, do you have to worry about anything
Well, we keep
biting,
it.
sticking you, or biting you there?
Yes, there's I don't know. Are you familiar with the plant that we call buckthorn in Wisconsin? It's a prickly invasive species. There's another version of that here that spreads like wildfire, and it has prickles, big spikes, and it actually makes our tractor tires deflate routinely. So it's important to keep the antenna field mowed close so that woody stuff won't build up. Here, it's a useful barrier between the beach and the antenna field, so let it go. But there's a wide variety of stuff in there, it looks like. And if left on its own devices, that some of that will grow up into be full-size trees. So I guess my point of this was not to talk about Niihau, but to say this is not a good place for electronic equipment. I want your sympathy. This surprises people, but we are still in the QSL card business. And as far as I'm concerned, we will be until the station is ended. It is one of the few ways we have any connection to our users. They can't really come here to see the station very easily. It is possible, but it's not simple. And it's not convenient. I interact with a lot of people by email, of course, but we're glad to get reception reports. Some of them are actually quite interesting in the context of what we were doing at that time. Maybe we were on the auxiliary antenna or something, and Sometimes people notice. We have people who listen a lot, surprisingly. It's kind of boring programming. But they will tell me when something has dramatically changed. So I build those kind of relationships. I actually learned that in public radio, building relationships, because a lot of the listeners were members of the organization. It was very easy to build this kind of rapport. I have a fellow in Australia who was reporting interference to our 15 megahertz signal down his way, and by using SDR receivers in there, and then the Philippines, Hong Kong, also East Coast or West Coast of the United States, West Coast of South America, we determined that the interference seemed like it was coming from Antarctica, which was very, very interesting. I don't have any direction finding capability, but just by seeing where the hops were for where the signal was landing and where it was concentrated, that seemed to be the case. Very interesting stuff. It was a data signal that was adjacent. It wasn't right on 15. It was about a kilohertz and a half away. And that implies, and I've seen this before, there are, I can't think of the right word for it, clandestine stations who will hide under our signals. And they're using a modulation scheme. The receiver knows to pick it out of our signal. And I don't know if anybody remembers the Yosemite Sam incident. That's been 20 years ago now, but there was a station that happened to be originating in the southwestern United States that was playing an endless loop recording of Yosemite Sam saying, "I'm going to blow smithereens." And one of their main frequencies was, they bounced around, but it was under WWV and VH, I suppose. I don't think anybody really ever pinned down exactly what that was all about. There was a data burst and then that weird audio clip, but they were hiding it under WWV. So that was a good example of that. This is a QSL I received during the 8-month-long onerous application and interview process for this job. I happened to be calibrating my service monitor on 10 megahertz using WWV at my house in Wisconsin. And I thought, well, I'll just click the switches and go up to 15 and see how it sounds. And I heard WWVH and I thought, well, it'll be funny. I'll send a reception report, see if they recognize the name as the guy who's interviewing for the job. Unfortunately, they thought I was trying to test them or something and got freaked out. I thought it would be funny. Sorry. It was not a test.
And you got the job.
I did, strangely. No, there's only a few people who would really be into this sort of thing. So it's right up my alley as a longtime user of the service, shortwave listener, ham, experienced in this sort of, and broadcast engineer. That's not unheard of combination, but the enthusiasm level probably is high for me compared to some.
Your QSL requests, are they send them to Hawaii or do they come to Boulder?
No, they come right here. P.O. Box 417, Kekaha. It's announced every hour. Kekaha, Hawaii. That's the nearest little town here. And zip code is 96752. Aloha. That's what Jane says on the air. So I had to. I couldn't help myself. I have heard it a lot.
What's amazing is in Fort Collins, I often get WWVH coming in stronger than WWV.
Oh yeah.
On 10 megahertz, and I can't explain why other than the skip is just correct and it's coming down.
How close are you to the side?
I'm only 13 kilometers away. So
see, that shouldn't even. You should have ground wave. I mean.
I do have ground wave, but sometimes 10 megahertz in the early evening is when I've noticed it. And
I wonder if their antenna has a lot of, maybe their antenna has a lot of high angle and it's actually coming down and canceling their signal out. You know, the ionospheric reflection is out of phase with the ground wave.
Oh, like an NVIS?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. But
AM
Other
stations
people-
on the high end of the AM band suffer from that problem. Yeah, same thing. It
Huh.
hurts their fringe coverage because it's their own signal coming back at them. They're well advised to use a half wave or a 5/8 tower to minimize that upward signal because of that. And it's shorter wavelength, so it's easier to do. The most common question is simply, how accurate is the time? Well, we keep it down to the, as I mentioned, to the nanoseconds. And we do actually much better than what it says on this slide, but the problem is that the propagation time to get to the listener is significant at this level. So the speed of light, and maybe worse than that, it's the variations in the time of arrival due to delays in the ionosphere. So as propagation changes, the actual time of arrival changes, both because the path length changes and there is a change in, because the density of the ionized cloud, it changes the speed of the radio signal. A very little bit, but it is a thing. It slows it, it doesn't make it faster. Einstein has a beef about that. Most users in the United States would get the signal within 10 milliseconds from us and be better from WWV. But we have a telephone service. There's the number. You can call that 24 hours a day, and you just hear the same audio that's on the transmitters. It auto answers, and you can hear the audio. It is not a time and temperature or something for Hawaii. It is just our audio. But people used to use that a lot. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a modem service that people used to use in the 90s and early 2000s, used to set their computer time. But the problem is we're pretty much out of the age of analog telephone. And so not only is your local link to the central office probably voice over IP, even if you have a copper pair at your house, down at the pedestal or down at the Mux hut, it's being turned into voice over IP over a computer network. And that does not have a fixed timing. It arrives when it arrives, you know. And there are, for telephony over internet, there is a recommendation from the ITU that it should not be longer than 150 milliseconds, but that's a lot. But again, it's a variation. That's worse than it just being delayed. It's unpredictable. Cell phone makes that worse too. But I don't think anybody's caring about it down to that level. You're listening to Jane say aloha, you know, that's the main thing. But we have several lines for that. The only reason that stuff, the modems and the telephone dial-up still exist is we get the phone lines almost free from the Navy. So that's no real expense there other than our time to take care of it, but that isn't much. So that is my presentation. We've taken questions along the way, which I enjoy, but some people hold them to the end. So I always remind myself to make up time for it.
Well, Steve,
So
this is Dave in London, Ontario.
Hey, Dave.
We've just been listening to WWV on 15 and on 10, and the woman on 15 was almost as strong as the man.
Yeah, excellent.
Coming in very well.
Strapping signal, yes.
We were also hearing her on 10 megahertz with a bit more noise, but we are hearing Hawaii.
Excellent. Well, that reminds me that I should add to this presentation, and I've thought of it earlier and didn't do it, the fact that people use our signals as propagation indicators.
Oh, absolutely.
That may be
Yes,
one
we
of the
do.
frequent uses of our signals. And it's true for other time signals as well. In the Western Pacific, we're losing coverage because China has upgraded their time signals and they're on exactly the same frequencies. Their call sign is BPM, and they identify in Morse. If you ever hear CW on 5, 10, 15, 20, it's probably BPM from China. But in Japan, for example, it's a fight between WWVH and BPM as to what they hear.
Yeah, I've heard BPM here in New Hampshire,
Oh, that's cool.
as
And then
well as
which
more
frequency?
often I'll get the Brazilian station,
Yeah.
also in 10 megahertz.
A lot of those are gone, like JJY in Japan is gone, unfortunately. So you certainly couldn't have heard us when they had their own, but and BPM, but BPM has upgraded. It's very clear to me that they're much stronger than they used to be. So
Yep,
they
I've heard them.
repurposed some of their jamming transmitters for time and frequency service.
Yes, was mentioned. I'm in New Hampshire, and I very often get WWVH and WWV almost equal. In fact, it is almost right at that point right now on 15 megahertz. And what I find fun is there are times when I'll hear WWVH and WWV is not there,
Yeah,
which means it's not a double skip, it's a duct.
yeah, something else is happening. We had a researcher, you may have heard we have what's called the ham size signal, which is an unusual waveform that plays once an hour.
Yeah, some of us are part of HAMSI.
Yep, absolutely. The researcher went to the Falkland Islands and monitored the signals during the eclipse. And it was pretty interesting what they were hearing, but hearing VH there better or, mixed at least with WWV was pretty cool. That's sort of on the other side of the world.
Yeah, we're actually trying to figure out how to separate WWV and WWVH. The sidebands can, of course, distinguish.
Yeah, I've
And
thought about that over the years, and I'm much more interested right now. But I've thought about some kind of phase coherent thing. But we're very close in phase with each other, so that.
yeah, and you say 10 milliseconds, but it's 30 milliseconds delay from Hawaii to New Hampshire.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that figures really for
But
WWV.
but what how that figures? I also like hearing the double time ticks.
Yeah,
And I appreciate that they're different frequency.
yeah.
One's at
That blew
1,000
my
and
mind.
one's at 1,200. So I can actually, I'm also into audio.
Yeah,
You know, my other hat is pro audio. And so I
absolutely.
have good ears and I can hear the rising tone as the two ticks come through.
Yeah, well, imagine me having heard WWV my whole life, pretty much exclusively. I mean, I heard VH, but when I walk in here and I hear that higher pitched tone, I'm like, that ain't right. Now it would be wrong if I heard the other one. So,
Question here. I from Iowa have watched the SDR and zoom in on it. I find it fascinating that you can see differences in the levels of the side tones
oh yeah.
of the side bands.
But you're getting multipath.
Well, I wonder sometimes if it's the SDR processing or if it's the multipath or there are patterns in it that you can see. I've spent many evenings just sitting there staring at it, which is probably not a good example of what I have to do with my life.
Okay.
But
I'm not going to comment. Yeah, I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
it is fascinating to hear that and watch
Yeah,
it.
it's
I
probably
think the
not
dominant
the
thing is the comb filter effect from the multipath.
right.
You're getting multiple refractions, reflections, whatever from the ionosphere, and they're arriving slightly out of time from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not likely to be the SDR. That's very coherent, and it would be from the multipath.
But it's what I
Red
even
F is the
what I
term where
loved
you
on
get
shortwave.
multiple carriers coming in.
Yeah. Well, I loved listening to shortwave broadcast because of that tearing craziness of the comb filter. And then when the carrier would be the one thing that was knocked out, and you're left with the sideband sticking up tall, and how that sounds. That means shortwave radio to me. That's but I did get into synchronous detection, and I used to sell kits for synchronous detection, which helped eliminate that problem. And you could do selectable sideband demodulation with my kit. So I was actually fighting against that, but it's still, a lot of people, the only place they ever hear that is if they hear like World War II recordings of shortwave link broadcasts, and you might hear a crowd, like Nazi rally crowd, and just that roar of noise, and then you hear the comb filter effect moving through it from this multipath propagation.
Now, I do have a question about the Hamsai modulation. We just lost it on WWV for about a week. Turned out the timecode generator had failed, and that got repaired.
Yeah, it's a signal generator. It would be, it's a little like an arbitrary waveform generator. And
right.
it's playing
right.
back the file. Yeah.
So how do you have that connected in for WWVH?
Fed into an audio mixer along with everything else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we very much
it has a
appreciate
real,
that signal.
It does not go through the audio processing because I assume that would mess it up to some degree, but
Right.
so it is direct. And we had it go off one time, and it's not the kind of thing that like there's any alarm on it or anything, that we would necessarily notice. I noticed it probably after a couple days, just walking through the transmitter room and everything. I don't sit here and listen 24/7, but we're in the quiet period.
Minutes, coordinated universal time.
The receiver's overloaded with no antenna, but
What receiver do you have there?
that's the Sea Crane Skywave. It's pretty good, but it does get overloaded. I took the antenna off because it was really overloaded with the antenna on it. I have one of these too. I've deliberately bought this on eBay. Do you remember these from Radio Shack?
Oh, yes.
The Time Cube.
Yeah, well, I have a number of those, the actual cube version. To the point where I had friends who would say, what time does what does the man in the box say?
Yes. And just to throw people off, I've got this here on my desk too. Pocket watch. That's the master clock.
That was kind of fun hearing you turn up the volume on your radio, and then I have my radio turned to WWVH right now, and hear her voice come through. There's some latency there. Zoom's a little behind.
The conference call stream, that's probably the dominant part of it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I might have gotten distracted, but you were mentioning how do we keep the Hamsai signal on the air, and it's just human at this point, just noticing that it's gone.
One of the issues that has come up, and they're trying to figure it out right now, Dave McGraw, Bill Lyles is working on this, but when the key site keys in and starts that broadcast, it's not always at the same time because it's not part of the time code. It's injected audio, so it keys up at different times. And even though it might be just milliseconds off, it does make a difference in sort of how they're trying to study this. So
that's not helpful.
Yeah, but the next transmission that will be addressed a little bit, and then they're also looking at trying to do a coherent transmission. So we can measure that time of flight will be real important as part of that Hamsai.
Well, that's definitely the next step. I wonder if that signal generator, waveform generator, is synchronized to the 10 or the 15 or the 10 or the 5 here. I'll have to look at that, but that doesn't mean that would keep the timing of the signal start correct. But there is those key site units can be synchronized to external, but I don't know that would help with that problem. They may not even know, the maker may not even know that's a thing, that's an issue. It doesn't play it exactly the same. You're muted.
Dave, you're muted.
You're muted.
Oh,
DA.
sorry about that. I was going to say it's when they bring in the time code and the audio from the key site. They're not always exactly lined up. So,
Right.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Steve, thank you so much for.
Question? If
Oh,
Yeah.
more
if we can
questions.
keep
Go
going
ahead.
it? Yeah, I'm going to assume that with a regular government installation plus being on the military base, that visitors to Hawaii cannot get a station tour.
Well, I'm so interested in, users and that relationship with the users that in fact I would be willing to go out of the base, like, maybe go to a parking lot at the post office in Kekaha and meet somebody and then bring them into the base. I'm allowed to bring a visitor in as long as they have a driver's license and seem legit. They let them in.
We're going to have a whole lot more
I did
visitors
have one
all of
guy
a sudden.
I was going to say you better get a bigger coffee pot. There's going to be a lot of
We're
guys
all coming
showing
to
up.
Hawaii.
Yeah, we're on our way.
They roped me into being president of the Kauai Amateur Radio Club. I put it off for a year. I said, I have a new job. I don't want to do it. They didn't have a president. And then I agreed to it. But then the first thing is like, well, you're going to give us a tour, right? And I can arrange a group tour. That is a thing, but it is a big production. And getting everybody wrangled with their filling out an application and all this jazz. So
I'm just
the other
curious
way is you pay $25 and you plan ahead and you get a pass like my pass, because I'm considered a visitor. Now, and you get one of these then, and you can come on the base anytime. You're not supposed to drive all the way down to our place, but I can't imagine anybody would have a problem with that.
Are the locals aware of the significance of your station?
That's an interesting point. The both times that I took a tour, an ocean tour, like I can't help myself, a 3-hour tour, you know what I mean? The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. Yeah, so to go out and look at the beautiful, beautiful Nepali coast, you can get a boat and go with a tour, But anyways, it goes right past the station. So I talked to the people, the crew about it, and they are aware, those people, they're locals, and at least the captains of the ships are, and they were aware of it in most general terms, that they knew it was a thing. The general population, if somebody grew up in Kekaha, for example, they probably do know, because they probably get interference on their old telephones. So just today, I had a group come in, a typical Navy PMRF mystery inspection. You have no authority here. What are you doing? We pay big money to be here. Anyways, they wanted to, look at the fire alarms and all everything. Once a year, they'll do that one. But anyways, the guy immediately recognized the sound because his marine radio on his fishing boat gets interference from it when he's right off the shore here. It's probably actually not getting in radio wise. It's probably getting onto his external speaker leads or something.
Is there any thought of ever trying to do a 60 kilohertz signal for the nearby population for atomic clocks, so to speak?
Yeah, I've thought about it. I think I consider it a long-term project. In the current climate, no, there's no chance of it. There's very little chance of our survival under the literal current climate. Yesterday, I was given 30 minutes to respond to an email from Elon Musk asking about staffing. WTF?
Send them the time.
There's only 3 of us. One's a secretary.
Steve, this is a little bit off topic, perhaps, but my nephew is not on here, but he's employed at Wisconsin Public Television in Madison.
Oh, very cool.
And he mentioned to me when I told him you were going to be on, I thought he might be on here tonight, that they're redoing the roof on one of the campus buildings, and they're trying to figure out what to do with one of your antennas that's up there. So
One of
if
my
you
personal antennas?
apparently that's what
Yes,
they
yes,
think.
that is a thing. Yes, there are two repeaters still there.
So if you want to save your antenna, you might want to get a hold of those guys. And I can send you his email address because I think they've got a project for this summer to redo the roof, and they're contemplating tossing your antenna over the side. So
well, that would be the 6-meter ground plane for the 6-meter and repeater. Not much loss there, really. But I have allowed it to run. Nobody said anything. There's a 220 repeater and a 6-meter repeater on those. Now I had 440 and 2-meter repeaters at the WHA transmitter site. Those had to move. The other agency took over that site. Grumble. So anyways, but yeah, there's, as far as I know, they're still running. There is no control operator though. I'm 4,000 miles away.
well, I will try to send you the his contact information if you're going to try to save your antenna.
It's just up there on a non-penetrating, just laying on the roof basically. And like I say, if they need to move it, of course, just go.
Any other questions for Steve?
Yeah.
Kevin.
My screen reader was stuttering and announcing that I was about to raise my hand. So I don't know if it's up or not. But in any event, so in the changeover from Otacron, I assume, did you just keep Jane Barbie's voice pretty much from the get-go when you switched over?
It was on 1/4-inch tape.
Uh-huh.
And that was dubbed to early wave file format.
Yep.
And that's what's in and well, it's actually not, it's not a wave. There's no headers on it or anything. It's just I can't think of the right term for it. It's just raw bits, at the right speed.
Because I know that we did not keep whoever we had, and I guess went even with synthesized voice for a while, and maybe still are. I'm not sure. So it's interesting to hear that you kept all of that original.
Yeah, one of my first tasks was I found on a backup drive, or the IT situation here is just a mess. It's craziness because it's a combination of high security because we have a VPN into the federal network and all this jazz. So it's just and there's none of those people here, so it's a hodgepodge. But my point is that I found on several network drives, I found the collection of Jane's recordings, and I put them on a portable drive and took them to my house, so we have an off-site copy because we don't want to lose that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
and
cool story.
And I might just let you know that I was listening specifically to hear WWVH when back when we did our WWV field day thing. There were 2 occasions when I was invited to give an announcement about WWV's anniversary and what was the other one?
The Mars.
Yeah.
Mars program.
Yeah.
There was at least once that I stayed up late in the night and found an SDR that was hearing both signals, WWV and WWVH, and got a recording. You can't hear my voice real well on the Hawaii one, but you can tell it's there, and you can tell it's me.
Cool.
So I was.
You're one of the rare birds who's been on these stations.
I know.
That was a pretty neat honor you had, Kevin. That was great.
It was very, very fun to do.
Now you're
Yeah.
making me want to plug a mic in the front of the transmitters and get on.
Has anybody been on either one of those live
I don't think so.
over the
I mean,
years?
at the old site, I bet so,
Uh-huh.
because it didn't have, it was, I have some photos of the
Right.
racks and stuff, and it's very primitive. And
Yeah.
there's a console, it's like a radio studio. So you could plug a mic in if it wasn't already plugged in. And there were people sitting there being bored.
Oh God. Yeah.
There was 24-hour operators. So
Yeesh.
that's I guarantee you I would if I wasn't doing that job.
Yeah.
Might be something good to do on leap day.
Yes, absolutely.
It sounds
Now
like a
they're
harder
talking,
job than a
how they have
security.
the leap second. We have to add the leap second sometimes. And now it's talking about they want to subtract one, but our system doesn't account for that.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Is there ever going to be a 20 megahertz from you?
Oh, that's right. I didn't really finish answering about this 60 kilohertz idea. Same principle though. Yes, I would like to do that. We have room in the antenna field. I could put something together, and at that frequency, it could be at a lower power and still be useful and effective. The WWVB idea, that BH or whatever you'd have it as a call sign, would also be okay to be a lower power if it's meant to serve just Hawaii on ground wave. It's all legit. And if you guys will keep this to yourselves, we already have licenses for all that. But we don't get our licenses from the FCC. Our licenses come from the NTIA. But yeah, we have 20. I think we have 25, and we have 60 kilohertz. They're in the book, in the license book.
But I don't suppose how many clocks are there in Hawaii?
Well, not very many because it didn't work, but people move here. And the last guy I talked to, he had a watch. He had a watch that could synchronize. That has probably the least chance of hearing WWVB compared to a fixed installation. But if they made one that used the new PSK demodulated signal, that would be possible.
Actually,
but,
the watch
on
I've got,
Amazon, you can't buy most of the atomic clocks if your address is in Hawaii. But I was able to buy that lacrosse product.
I've done no scientific study of it, but I have a Citizen watch that'll set to WWVB, and I think it works better than some of the desktop clocks that I've got in the house.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's probably designed really well. I have one here that was in the office, Casio, that is a atomic timekeeping radio watch. I like watches, so I immediately said, "Oh, need that on display."
Steve, I think if you ever run low on funding, you ought to sell advertising. The following minute is brought to you by Ford Trucks.
Yes, we've got options. We've got the availabilities in the wheel. The Mars messages aren't there anymore, and some of the other slots are open. So, as we called it in the radio biz, we had avails.
All right.
I've seen this question asked before for people in Hawaii. Have you got at what point do people start to go stir crazy? Those of us in Wisconsin facing winter, we look at that as a paradise. But I suppose if you're on an island that has one road that doesn't go all the way around, at some point maybe you've seen everything.
Yeah, I'm there already. Yeah. That does cause a lot of mainlanders to move away because there's just not enough things to do. But I'm a hobby person, so I'm making my own fun most of the time. So that the problem for me is that I am in fact alone here. My family's still in Wisconsin, so my wife lives at our house there, but she's caring for her elderly mother who has dementia. So, and she's working her job there. This is also a very, very, very expensive place to live for relatively primitive conditions. You're paying a lot of money. So I need a good salary to cover this, but it works. It works. You know.
Do you get off the island and get to Oahu and other places, or
I had to go to Oahu to get my ID because there was no place here to make a federal ID. So I had to literally fly over there twice for that purpose. But that's when I went and saw that nice museum at Pearl Harbor and did a few other things. Went to a Chinese buffet and, you know, other important things like that. They're also, no, I don't know if I should say that. You guys will be all right with this. Being a military installation, there are plenty of what in Virginia we call go-go clubs, strip clubs. So I haven't, but now that I think about it, I should.
Question about the station operation.
Yeah.
It's been a while. Many years ago, I engineered at an AM station.
Yeah.
And the logging there was interesting. It was, for us, it was paper. And I'm sure now it's not. But I wonder how you do your logging and your control operator situation when you got to leave the island to do stuff.
Well, at least there's two of us, and we can offset our travel and have one of us here at all times. I'm the engineer, and then there's a technician. We each have our strengths and weaknesses. Together, we make the best results. But the problem is we really need one more to cover things properly, and also for things like the antenna project. It's a 3-person job at minimum. So. And I tried twice to hire the technician, but each time I got skunked by our HR. The first time I was all the way to making offers to the finalists, and I just confirmed the offer is X dollars, and I'm going to work my way down through these 3 people that we had picked. And they said, "Oh, no, we had to reduce that. You're 40 kilo dollars too high." So oddly enough, guys who had interviewed, gone through our arduous process, did not want to hear that their pay was not 120,000, it was 80,000. So that was the end of that. Second time we reopened it, I didn't go that far before they said, "Well, we just decided not to do it to save money." So we need more people to cover those kind of eventualities. Now, we do not have a need for a control operator. There's no requirement. We don't have any regulations like that. So, and I say our license comes not from the FCC. So we sort of can define our own best practices. So when I arrived, I felt that the alarm command and control and monitoring and logging was really not good enough. So I built this new system, and it'll log, and it could in the future take action. That's not what it's going to do in the first case, but it could make decisions about turning transmitters on and off and stuff. Right now, that's very primitive stuff. It does happen automatically. So if the main goes down, the aux comes on, but there's no return from the aux to the main and things like that, that I would try to have the ability to do remotely from any broadcast station. So that needs to be built. I did not buy a broadcast remote control system because that's considered an IT item, and an IT item is not for me to buy. So that has to go through other departments. So I built it out of other pieces of stuff, but it was things I'm familiar with, programmable logic controllers and stuff. And it has a stored audio module. And if it calls out to say there's trouble, in this first iteration, it's just my voice saying over and over that there's trouble at WWVH. But it has the ability to grow way beyond that. And also we'll be monitoring other things like room temperature, the other alarms, burglar alarm, fire alarm, all the other things. So
Well,
Well,
thank you
we
very much. This has been very informative.
yeah, thank you, Steve, very much. And
Fantastic.
are there any other questions that we might have? This is definitely the longest we've ever had our meeting, but that's fine.
Well, I'm on my own time because I was done at 4:30 and it's 5:08 now.
Right. So thank you for
But
your
I
time
enjoy it. I enjoy talking
and the
about it.
government's.
I did. Yeah, don't tell Elon I'm still here.
Well, you're doing an important service, community outreach, as you put it. That's a really important task. So
Yeah, that had
very
not
much.
happened for a long time, I suspect. So
That's
Well,
true.
my wife and I will be at Pearl Harbor in June. We will check out the museum. Unfortunately, we won't be stopping at your island, but we'll take in as much as we can. So thank you very
well,
much,
it would
Steve.
only cost you about $200 to come over on the plane. And there's like 6 or 8 flights a day. So
Hawaii is a wonderful island. I definitely I enjoyed the stay we had there with my kids. This was 15, 20 years ago. But we did a hike into the middle of the island and hit the we were headed to the there's a tunnel through one of the mountains to the other side. It's an irrigation tunnel, I guess, so you can walk through. And we never quite made it there because the mud was so thick trying to make it across on the hike into that area. And Kauai is very famous for its mud.
I drive home. That zone, almost every single day is just pouring rain back in there.
Yeah, it's incredible. It really is. It's what 250 inches of rain a year or something. It's
a rain
phenomenal.
forest, but it's because the air coming in from the windward direction, it rises over those mountains and then dumps it in the middle.
Yeah, very, very, very beautiful. But Kauai
And
is very,
Waimea Canyon,
very beautiful.
Did you go up into Waimea Canyon? That's beautiful.
Waimea Canyon went up to. We didn't do anything out in the ocean around the Nepali coast, but we got to a couple of viewpoints that you can see there and
look down on it.
Looking down, yeah, it's incredible. And then of course going around the other side of the island and up to Princeville, and it's.
I mean, you wouldn't think it, but it is Grand Canyon-ish.
It is. It's really an amazing place. It's an incredible
rugged,
island.
It's volcanic. It's dormant volcano here, but we actually
Well, it's so weathered. You got that wonderful that brown. I mean, they tie-dye clothes that if you get that brown in there, it's never coming out. So
yes, that's
you
that
gotta be
reddish
careful.
brown. Yeah.
Yeah, that reddish brown dye. Well, thanks again, Steve, for taking the time and your time, your own time to visit with us and share all this. You've got a lot of comrades here that all share the same love of radio, so it's fun to hear all this and to get your inside view on all that too.
Can I have like an auxiliary branch of the club? It'll be WWVH ARC.
There you go.
I think we should. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were hams here. I can tell there were hams here at various points by the things they left behind. I'll stop talking. I keep going on and on.
Steve, do you try to work any of the DX contests for ham radio?
Well, I don't really get on the contests. Initially, the limiting factor was that my neighborhood was so noisy. I'm in the town of Kalaheo, and there's houses with solar systems, every single one of them, and a significant number of those are radio noisy. Either when they're charging their batteries or playing back the power, so to speak, in the evening. And that can be limiting, but I found an antenna placement. I first used a noise canceller, and on certain bands, I was able to cancel the noise. But now with the way I've oriented my 40-meter dipole, I am, in fact, it's as quiet as a mouse on 40. The other bands are S9 or 10 over or whatever, just a raucous noise. So that's a limitation. I operate mobile. I also go to the parks. The park that's right behind my house is dead quiet too. So that's so I have an ICOM 705 I can take out there and play around.
That's a great radio.
Oh, it is. Yeah, I set up one of those telescopic whips from MFJ on 10 meters or 17 or 15. Perfect. Quick and easy. Picnic table, away we go. One guy came walking up to me and he said something. He was kind of an old timer, and he said, "Oh, you on 2 meters or 440?" So I assume he's a ham, and so I reach out to shake his hand, and I told him I was on 10 meters at that moment. He just turned away and wouldn't speak and walked away. Maybe he's not a ham. Maybe he turned his license back in anger or something.
Interesting people. Yeah.
Yeah. Take
All
care,
right.
guys. Talk to you and sure enjoyed it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much, very much. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Super.
is there any other announcements that anybody might have this evening that you want to share? Anything going on?
Wisconsin QSO party is next a week from Sunday. So try to work Wisconsin. We're the in the central hub of the United States here. So,
And that's the day we go to daylight savings time, right?
I don't know.
Sunday the 9th, right?
Hoping for an executive order in the next 9 days, but I don't know if I'll get it.
We'll see. Well, very good. I'm going to be doing an interesting thing this weekend. In Fort Collins, at Colorado State University, there's an organization called the Little Shop of Physics. And the Little Shop of Physics is very popular. They go out to schools and all over the place taking hands-on physics demonstrations. But it's a big event here in Fort Collins. And I worked with the folks right down the hall from me, and they asked me, "Hey, do you want to set up a radio station?" So I'm going to do an amateur radio demonstration at this Little Shop of Physics on Sunday. And it'll be from 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's 1700 to 2300 UTC. And I'm going to be on 20 meters, I figure is where I'm going to be. And we'll just be doing some demonstrations for people to see what radio is about.
Well,
so if anybody's on 20 meters on a Sunday afternoon, let me know.
This is the International DX Phone Contest weekend. There should be lots and lots.
Oh, there'll be tons of people. Yeah. So we'll get on there. I think our event goes beyond the operating window for that, but it'll be a lot of fun. So we're supposed to have beautiful weather here for this weekend, and then snow coming next week. So this will be a fun thing to do. And Kevin, you'll appreciate this. I'm going to use W0QEY is going to be the call sign. So it's the CSU,
really?
The CSU call sign
right.
on HF,
Yeah.
probably for the first time in 15 years or more.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's cool.
I got approval from Don, the trustee of the station, and so we're gonna do that, and it'll be fun.
Cool. Yeah.
That seems like a really good audience for that sort of demonstration, the physics folks.
Oh, it's a really neat event, and it really draws a lot of young kids. They get to come in and participate, and it's all hands-on stuff. It's a really good program. They've had this running for over 25 years at the university. And
it sounded like a lot of fun. My first acquaintance with it was the little strip that you run your fingernail down and you can hear a Little Shop of Physics.
Right. So it was an audio,
with
the little piece of plastic
audio groove.
Yeah, the grooves on the audio, and you just run your finger down the strip, and believe it or not, that's trademarked. There's only one company that can make those. They have a patent on it somehow. So yeah. Anyhow, it'll be a fun event.
Well,
so it'll be.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, folks. Thank you so much for sticking around as long as you did. We had a good turnout, and it was really fun hearing everything from Steve. That was really neat. And
thank you very much.
Yeah. So a reminder next month.
More than the YouTube video.
yeah, for sure. So next month, Glenn Nelson will be here, and he'll be talking about WWV, the history of it. And Dave McCarter is still on here, isn't he? Is he on the call, or did he vacate? I think he might have snuck off. But Dave McCarter is going to give in April, our April meeting. He's agreed to give his talk on time, and so he has a take on time. And I think it'll be very interesting, and so he'll bring that perspective in and I'll get a better description from Dave. But he'll be here in 2 months, so that'll be really fun. We actually have programming going this year, which is really great. So
If you find
thank you.
yourself in need of a presentation, I've got a couple others, like one on radio noise and tracking radio noise and stuff like that. I could help with more presentations.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. We'll definitely keep that in mind. And your expertise is incredible. So a lifetime of experience, and you bring a lot into it. That's really neat. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say goodnight, everybody, and thank everybody for being here. And Steve, go home and get some dinner. All right. Good
73
night,
off.
everybody.
73.
Good night. Good night, everybody.